So the question we are battling today is, can you experience PTSD symptoms after neglect? And I think a lot of times people may downplay the trauma that neglect can bring onto a person's psyche, view of themselves, view of the world. And the question we're going to ask today is, can you have PTSD from neglect?
Welcome to the Stop Suffering in Silence podcast with your host, Denise Walsh and Rachel Timothy.
Hey, my friends. My name is Denise Walsh. I'm a clinical psychologist and co-founder of Stop SIS, and I'm here with Rachel Timothy. And today we are going to talk through a fascinating movie that I have read and watched. I'm going to explain it to Rachel, and it's based on a real life story. And then we've got a few talking points that we'd like to touch on. And I think it's relevant to most trauma survivors. So, Rachel, anything you want to add before we dive in?
Yeah, I think you can think of neglect in a lot of different ways. It can be physical, it can also be emotional. And I think we're going to see maybe all of that within this story.
Yeah. Thank you to those who've been reaching out and donating towards the Open Blind Eyes Rachel's Story Netflix version. That's what I'm calling it.
Okay. It's kind of cool. We're talking about a story, a real life story is kind of what we're raising money for too.
Yeah, that's true. And if you're interested in donating, we're looking to create a high quality, not a documentary. It's more of would you call it a movie, Rachel?
I would call it a mix between a short film and a documentary. So it's going to be telling my story through my own words, but also just with a short film aspect to it.
So Rachel's writing the script, but yet there'll be actors within it. So there'll be scenes that are played out. So you'll get to see a little girl and experience it through Rachel's eyes. So yeah, the donation information and link is below, and everything that we raise in the next 30 days is going directly towards that project. And our goal is $10,000. And we know a lot of businesses and, need year-end gifts. And so we want to just be loud about what we're up to in case you have a business or you personally need to create a year-end gift to offset taxes. We'd love to be there for you.
Yeah, it's going to impact a lot of people. So yeah, don't forget about us.
Yeah. Okay. So let's dive into the movie/book. I actually listened to the audiobook back in 2016. I remember because I was training for a bodybuilding competition and I was doing a lot of running on the treadmill, sprints and stuff. And I would get tearful while I was running because the book was so moving. And then I knew back then that they were planning on creating a movie out of it, but I never really heard what happened. And so I researched it this weekend and thought, oh my gosh, they did. They came out with a movie and it's been out for a few years. And so I watched it throughout this weekend. And so the book/movie that we're going to discuss today is called The Glass Castle. And I'm going to really briefly kind of give Rachel the highlight overview. So if you have not read The Glass Castle or seen the movie, I recommend doing so. Obviously, books are always better than movies because they get you into the character and you can hear and see the internal thoughts. But certainly the movie was good too. So at the end of the day, the movie was about Jeanette Walls, Walls. She's the author. This is really her autobiography. And she is the second of 4 children. So 2 girls, a boy, and then a girl. And her mom had bipolar disorder, and her dad was an active alcoholic. And so she grew up and neither of them were treated or getting help in any way or even acknowledged that they had a problem, right? And so her normal was super chaotic. I mean, they were homeless most of the time, moving around. There were scenes where they'd have to get up in the middle of the night because the debt, the money guys are coming or the debt collectors or whatever, and then they'd leave early in the morning. They really didn't have school up until their early high school years. I think finally they chose to figure it out and go to public school, the kids on their own accord. So they were homeschooled, which really just meant reading books and being taught by their parents about life. And so there's some one hand where it was super fun, and they slept on out in the stars, and they had tons of adventures, and they were super close knit, but yet they were having to fend for themselves most of the time, because even though her parents were physically present, they were not emotionally or mentally present. And so the story is about their childhood and just the chaos they grew up in. And then the choice that they made to go to school, apply themselves, and get themselves out of the situation. And so it's a powerful story of resilience, in my opinion, and just the choices that these kids had to make, that if they wanted out, they were going to have to do it themselves. And so the older sister, they saved up money. She ended up going to be a waitress in New York City, and then she got a job in a corporation. And then Jeanette, who is number two, she saved up babysitting money and went to New York City, and she ended up becoming a writer for a magazine. The third boy ended up becoming a police officer, and they didn't really describe what the fourth girl had ended up doing. It seemed like she had a bit more of a wayward spirit, maybe because she was alone with her parents more than the other kids, because by the time they left, she still had years left, and she still was figuring herself out. So she had not yet figured out what she wanted to do. But the two questions, and we're going to do them one at a time, that came to me while I was watching and experiencing the book, watching the movie, was, can you have PTSD from neglect? Because as I'm watching the Jeanette as an adult, she seems very functional. Of course, she's described as she's got a job, she's got relationships, she's got, like, we're so proud of how far she's come and where she came from and where she is now. But yet, in my psychologist's heart, I'm thinking she probably has some PTSD, because even though it did not depict sexual abuse, although that could be, there were some situations where her dad had her like flirt at bars and things like that for money, so he could like win that pool, and there could be some questionable activities happening there. The fact of the matter is at an early age, she had to take care of herself. And so what happens when at an early age, you realize that nobody is there to save you, that like nobody is going to be, you're on your own. And what does that do to the psyche and your view of yourself and your world? So any initial thoughts from this first discussion?
Well, it just makes me think of, you would go into survival mode. Like, you wouldn't have the brain space to think about fun things or be a kid. You would have to be in 100% survival mode, which sends your amygdala through the roof. Like, that's the piece of your brain that's the fight or flight, the survival, and it sends it skyrocketing, because you don't get the blessing of a family that is allowing you to be a kid.
Yeah. You never feel safe, I would imagine, right?
I would imagine, yeah.
You, even as soon as you let your guard down, we got to move. Right. And if you ask for help, and of course they depicted situations where, the child asked for something, asked for help. And often it was, go figure it out on your own, or that's not important, or there was nobody there to be the adult. Because in bipolar, and in this situation, it seemed like the mom was more manic. So she'd have bouts of in bipolar, you have bouts of depression, manic and again, there's a spectrum of bipolar, so not everybody's the same, but often you have a major depressive like episode, which means you can't function, like you're in bed depressed, and then it comes up to a manic episode where you're not sleeping because your mind is racing, you do a million things, you're making impulsive and risky decisions, and you're not an adult at that time. You're either way, you're not acting as a responsible adult. So there was nobody in the home most of the time that could take care of the children.
Yeah. And I can hear my kids in the other room. Are your kids home today?
No.
I'm changing the subject, but my kids are home. I can hear them in the other room, and I can hear them just say, "Where's mom?" And so I'm going to message real quick and tell my oldest son. Okay, keep going.
So, but yeah, survival mode. When you're in survival mode, you don't trust your environment. You don't trust, and so I wonder if that brings on self-reliance, like you have to begin to trust yourself.
I think it brings on that, but also you're having to take care of your parents.
Yeah.
If they're an active addict, or they are in a mental illness that isn't being taken care of, you aren't just in survival mode for yourself. You have the responsibility of the entire family.
Yeah. Yeah. You're exactly right, because the older siblings are taking care of the younger siblings, and then they're the ones that are hyper vigilant. They can see 3 steps ahead. All right, dad's coming home. Uh-oh, he's drunk. Uh-oh, everybody skedaddle. Uh-oh, let's make sure the house is clean, or they're the ones that are making sure that no blowups happen.
Yes, exactly.
And so the other thing with active addiction, so the mom had bipolar, which is a mood disorder. And typically, and there can be moments of stability, but if you're unmedicated and untreated, I don't have a ton of faith that there's like a ton of stability.
Right.
But there's lows and there's highs, and then addiction can again look differently for everybody. But in this situation, it made him really fun, the dad really fun, and potentially violent. So when I say neglect, there was a violence happening in the home too.
Yeah.
It might not be physical violence towards them. They didn't depict that, but it was throwing things, punching walls. The adults got into physical disagreements. Wow. And raising your voice. I mean, even raising your voice, the body can get into fight or flight mode, and the tension, the energy of the house is tense.
And I think what just makes it so much harder is that you throw in neglect, and you throw in these, violent episodes and manic episodes, and it's all with a person that you love.
Yeah.
Like that, how confusing.
Yeah. Yeah, that brings me to the second question, which is the confusion that comes from this.
Yeah.
So there's 2 points of the confusion. One is literal gaslighting. Like her dad being like, that's not happened. That's not what happened. That's not true.
That makes me want to scream.
And so that's confusing in and of itself. But like you said, it wasn't all bad.
Right.
There's moments of fun. There's moments of connective. In fact, they probably all have a trauma bond from being homeless and experiencing all of this themselves. So there's this immense connection and desire for somebody to get better. So there's a ton of fun and a ton of care and a ton of abuse all at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, it makes you question yourself. It makes you question the world. It makes you question what is real and what isn't real. And you get in your head yourself. And the fact that these kids were able to get out and choose better for themselves is a miracle in and of itself.
Yeah, it's a powerful story, which is why I was tearful while I was running.
Oh, I bet. But yet so much of this, I can see certain faces like of our survivors who they didn't maybe go, it wasn't maybe a homeless situation or, anything like that. But even just going to your caregiver with a need, an emotional need, an expressing of something that's going on, and being denied the validation and the love that they needed at that time is neglect. And it's confusing. And it messes with your head.
So let's look up symptoms of PTSD. And I'm sure we could name them, but let's look them up and see. What, okay. So symptoms of PTSD, intrusive thoughts or flashbacks related to the traumatic event. So for somebody who's experiencing neglect, that's not a one-time situation.
So this would be more chronic.
This would be more chronic because it's like consistency over time of neglect, of the violent episodes, of taking care of your parents, of trying to be the peacemaker potentially. I mean, everybody takes on a different role in addictive families. Some are the clown, they're trying to make everyone laugh. Some are the scapegoat, like we blame him instead of the addiction. There's lots of different roles, but her role was like the scholar. She was the one that tried to take care of everyone and tried to be the parent. So intrusive thoughts or flashbacks related to the traumatic event. I have to imagine that somebody growing up in this type of situation would have things like that. Would you agree?
I would totally agree.
Ooh, avoidance of the reminders of the trauma. So
trying to keep your mind on the good times.
And it reminds me of like deliberately avoiding people, places, or situations that remind you of that. So if you see a specific car, or maybe that's one reason why they moved to New York. Get me out of here. And they wanted to leave.
Makes sense.
Negative changes in mood and thinking.
And so then it goes back to, this was their whole life. So you're not going to probably see an abrupt change. It's all they knew.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that we have, with some of our survivors, it's like, remember what you were like before the abuse. They can't, because the abuse started so young.
Yeah. And even when we, like when I asked you, what's your favorite color? Who are you? What do you like? What does bring you joy? Like that took some time.
Oh, for sure. I remember you saying, okay, what would you like as like the protein for your meal? I don't know. Like, what do you like? Anything's fine. Like you just don't think about those things. You're just going to provide the survival that you need and move on.
Yeah. Another, let's see. Oh, heightened reactions, having a strong negative reaction. So basically being like emotionally triggered by loud noises, accidental touches, things like that.
And I think that would be dependent on what the abuse is. So, I think some of their moments that would trigger a reaction in them would be, somebody showing signs of abandonment, neglect, maybe even seeing those on the side of the road who are asking for money, like whatever situations they had been in the past would create an emotional response of remembering what it was like and the emotions that they had back then.
One situation they described in the movie was she was out to dinner with, so one thing that happened with them, I'll just share the whole kind of her adult story, was she went to New York, she got a job, and then she married into a wealthy family. It seems like, right? They didn't but they were all fancy pants in New York. And so she married into this wealthy family. And so in my opinion, it seemed like she chose safe and security. She chose security. And so she went from like this one extreme to the other, really, right? And we often say our whys are born out of a blessing or a burden. And so she was like, I do not want this. I do not want financial insecurity. And so I am going to swing all the way over here to security. And during some of this situation, like with the life with her husband, they would go out to dinner with clients and things, and she would ask for everybody's leftovers.
Aww.
And she would say, I do not waste food. And so that to me is a representation of her childhood coming out in adulthood of saying, like, heck no, like, we don't. Another thing, like, little quirk that they shared was that she had lived with her fiance for who knows how long. She still wasn't unpacked.
Oh, yeah, that is interesting. I'm sure that would be really hard to feel safe enough to unpack.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting too.
That makes sense.
And then they brought, the boyfriend around her family, her parents. They were squatting in an abandoned home in New York. They moved up to be by all the kids, and they were still homeless. But don't worry, they had money for alcohol somehow. So they were drinking. And one of the stories was that, the dad was like, come on, Jeanette, this isn't you. This isn't who you are. This is, and his ammo was to get the boyfriend, fiance drunk and then make him more fun because he's so straight-laced and things, and then get into arguments with him because that's what we do. And so they ended up getting into like this argument of the way of the world, and those guys over there who make all the decisions don't know anything, whatever type of argument it was. And they did an arm wrestle, and then
Oh my goodness.
the dad ends up punching the fiance in the nose and like broke his nose.
Oh,
And
no.
so if you live in this world of their chaotic world, that's normal. That's just
Right.
and so the reaction of the fiance was, I'm never going back there again. Like, they are never invited. You are not allowed to see them. Like, this is insane. But for Jeanette, it was such a hard decision to make.
So, how did she respond? Because I mean, sometimes it's that eye-opening moment of, oh, wait, this isn't normal. This isn't what everybody does.
Yeah, I think truth tellers are so helpful.
Yep.
Because you need someone to go, no, this is not okay.
Mm-hmm.
You've done so much rationalizing yourself, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it takes so much time to be able to piece out the things. And again, it's back to the both and of it was fun, but there's some things that are not normal, and there's PTSD from that. And so, holding both is
Yeah.
super hard, and being able to pick it apart and figure out at the end who you are.
Yeah. And to figure out how, like, I love these people and I want the best for them, but they're destroying themselves and they're going to bring me down with them.
Yeah.
So she basically said to him, I can say that, but you can't. Like, I'm allowed to call my family crazy. You can't call my family crazy. And it seemed like she did distance herself for a while. And then when her dad was on his deathbed, eventually she, went back and said her goodbyes to him. And then they showed, years down the road, she left her fancy life and got a job that was more congruent with who she believed herself to be, and divorced him, got a new job, and in my opinion, kind of, went from one extreme to the other. And then her subconscious was like, nah, this isn't us. And so she hopefully slid back somewhere in the middle, right? Where she could figure out who she is, what she wanted, and not just operating out of an autopilot or a reaction to her previous life.
Well, and all along the way, you're learning from people around you what a normal relationship looks like, what a normal life looks like. And you're trying to incorporate that into what you lived and who you want to become. It's just, relationships and how you're taught what that looks like growing up, I think greatly impacts you moving forward.
Yeah. And that's where the attachment style comes into play, right? So even if she knew her dad loved her, like her dad, she ended up being a gossip columnist, is that the word? And so he would like dismiss it, like, oh my gosh, you're so much better than that, things like that. And but yet on his deathbed, he showed her that he had binders of everything she's ever read. And so
Aw,
you know that he cares,
right.
but his addiction, he
Made him abusive.
he was abusive. Absolutely.
And so you have to look at more than just the care.
Yeah.
And that's so hard. That's so hard.
Yeah. Especially when you have hope for people. And I
Yep.
think that's the reality, is like recognizing we have to live in reality, not in our hope.
Yeah. I mean, and that's when you surrender it to God and say, okay, like I can't fix this.
Yeah.
My heart wants this relationship, but I know I won't function in it.
Yeah.
I won't be able to honor you in it, God, and so I have to lay it down.
And that's where you could see her struggle,
Oh,
because she was like, I love my family and I cannot be around my family.
yeah. And I think so many people are finding themselves in that spot right now.
Yeah.
I mean, you're hearing of it all the time.
And especially with holidays coming up, we work with survivors a lot on creating a new family, right? That where they feel like they can show up their authentic selves and they know it's going to be peaceful and not violent or chaotic or um,
So I got to share with you this, I think, cute story. A lady that I've been chatting with recently. Um, she comes from a background very similar to what this lady is writing about. A lot of neglect and a lot of addictions and emotional abuse. I don't know the full gamut of things, but she's now living in a transitional housing place as she's trying to get her life back. She's working 2 jobs, going to college, and she attends 5 Bible studies in the week. Like she's just committed to figuring out who God is and who she is to God. And along the way, a guy started to take interest in her, and it came to the moment where like they were going to meet each other's family. And her first reaction was, okay, yeah, let's do this. And took him to her church. And he was really nervous. And she's like, why are you so nervous? He goes, you don't understand. You have 3 spiritual dads, 3 spiritual moms, like a whole lot of aunt and uncles. And like, I got to meet all these people all at once. I'm getting a
Aw.
call from my doctor. Will you keep talking?
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so while Rachel answers the phone, let's talk a bit about what happens. So, one of the reasons why I thought this was an interesting conversation is because I believe that those, I've seen that those who have experienced neglect, um, whether a parent had mental illness or addiction, both can lead to the parent being in their own world, right? And the children having to fend for themselves, which in itself is neglect. Their needs are not being taken care of. But I can see how somebody might downplay that experience and say, well, I wasn't physically abused, or I wasn't sexually abused, or I wasn't assaulted, or whatever the case may be, right? And so I want to bring this to light because I think this is just as valid as any other type of trauma out there. Number one, we don't need to compare traumas ever, but this is traumatic to experience neglect in this way. And so, as somebody who's coming out of a home life that's chaotic and maybe feeling gaslit, maybe being the peacemaker, maybe having intense confusion, uh, and then you get into adulthood and you get to start asking yourself the question, who am I? And I think this is one of the, I would say, steps in the healing process. I was going to say early steps, but I don't know. I think it could really be done anywhere. It could be certainly one of the first steps, but it also could be anytime. I think it's an important step of the healing process, is asking yourself, who am I outside of the chaos? Who am I with outside of the responsibilities that are unnecessarily or unfortunately placed on me? Who am I now? And who do I want to be? Because, like we've said, her subconscious was, you know, developed in her childhood, those hardwiring, she went flipped to the other side and then kind of resorted back to somewhere in the middle. But she got to decide, who am I now and who do I want to be? And with that being said, there's some ownership there. And I think that's part of the healing process too, is for the first 18, 20 years of life, right? This was being done to me. Kids don't have a ton of choices. They don't have a voice. They don't have the ability to just up and leave. They don't have the ability to make their own money just yet. And so there's a lot of things that truly are being done to a child. But as you get into adulthood, you are able to take some ownership back of your life, your ownership back of where you want life to go. And I think if you don't ask those important questions, then you will be running on some sort of autopilot and your subconscious will take over, right? Whether it's repeating what you've known or swinging to the other side and saying, heck no to that, I'm going to go over here. So the questions to ask yourself, if you're asking, who am I, are, hold on, I'm going to take Rachel out. Who am I, are, what brings me joy? What are my natural strengths? What are things that people say, oh my gosh, this comes so naturally to you, you're good at this? What are some of the things that bring me joy? What fills my cup? Is it reading? Is it exercise? Is it writing? Is it crocheting? Is it pickleball? Is it like alone time? Is it group time? What are the things that fill your cup? What are the things that you could do that it would feel easy and fun, like you're in flow, right? Time goes by super fast. What do you long for? If it's your dream day, what do you really want life to look like? Do you want to live in the city? Do you want to live in the country? Do you want to be, see ocean? Do you want to see forest? Do you want to do your devotions in the morning? If you do, where's your devotion spot? Where's your journaling spot? Like, let's really get creative and clear and excited about who you are and what you really want. And I can imagine that somebody coming out of a chaotic environment such as Jeanette Walls, really had to ask herself those questions, not just in the first year of being out, but truly over the next 10 years. And I think that's why eventually she said, you know what? I chose security as my top priority over connection, over, like purpose, over what aligns with me or what I like. She had her top priority being security, which is totally fine. We're allowed to choose anything as we want, right? As long as we know. And so at some point during this healing process, she said, I no longer choose that as being my top priority. I need to be true to myself. And she brought in all these other elements. If you have not read The Glass Castle, I recommend it. Read the book first and then watch the movie and ask yourself these questions. What are some of the PTSD symptoms that somebody might experience growing up in this environment? The neglect, the emotional instability, but then also the violence coming from the addiction. And then also think about the confusion that might lead to, the gaslighting, but then also holding the fact that both things can be true. We love each other and it's toxic at the same time. So, Rachel, before we end, anything you want to add?
I think sometimes, and you maybe have already said this, but we almost neglect ourselves in thinking that this is worthy of getting help. And I just want to say to anybody who has experienced any form of neglect, whether it's physical or emotional, especially for long periods of time, do not neglect getting care, getting into a counselor, getting some of this stuff processed so that you can heal and that neglect won't continue down for generations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because this is not necessarily something where you go, oh, I'm better now, I'm out of that environment, right? Because that environment is still in you and it still impacts the way you view yourself and your world. And so unpacking that and recognizing, what was the meaning that I gave these situations and what did it say about me and who do I want to be and it can take a few years for all of that to unpack, which is why I think after a decade, Jeanette was like, this isn't who I want to be. She got divorced, quit her job, changed a lot of things, but settled into who she decided.
And I think also it's going to impact each personality differently. So like they had 4 kids, and I'm sure each of them carried it in a different way going forward. And so don't think to yourself, well, my sibling is, they're over it. They're good. They're moved on. And you're still battling it as if it's a sign of weakness. Each personality is different, is going to carry it differently, and needs different healing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, watch the movie, you guys. Let us know your thoughts. If you've seen the movie or if you've seen the book, in the comments below. We'd love to know your analysis or takeaways from this book and movie. And then also be sure to subscribe, like this video if you have not yet already. We need to let the internet algorithms know that this channel is worth watching. We love to do reactions. We love to talk all things mental health, psychology, healing, but also spread awareness on the traumas that people are experiencing in this world. And we'd love to have you on this journey with us. So be sure to like, subscribe, and we will see you next week.
Thank you so much for listening to this powerful episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. If you are interested in booking Rachel to speak at your event, workshop, school, church, or organization, then please email racheltimothy.stopsis@gmail.com. If you are interested in donating to the Stop SIS ministry, then please check out the link in the description box or show notes below. Or you can email stopsis@protonmail.com. And finally, if you are currently suffering in silence or you know somebody who is, then check out our website, stopsuffering.org, to learn more about our online programs and resources. We will always recommend that you also reach out to your local resources and find a counselor that you can trust, because nobody is meant to suffer alone. Have an amazing week, and thank you for being here.